What happens when a righteous person loses everything in a single moment? Wealth collapses, children vanish. The body is racked with pain, and God seems completely silent. In the middle of ash and tears, a human being still dares to lift his eyes to heaven and ask not in defiance, but in the deepest kind of grief. This is a story of faith tested to the final limit where every question has no answer until God speaks. Don't leave, because this dramatic Bible story about Job is only just beginning. That morning began like any other morning in the land of Uz. Wind moving over pasture land, the loud calls of livestock and workers shouting to one another from a distance. Job stood at the doorway of his house, watching sunlight fall across the tent roofs, his heart at peace. He had everything people usually call blessing: vast herds, wide fields, a house full of servants, and 10 children, like 10 lamps lit in his courtyard. But Job was not drunk on blessing. He feared something else. He feared his own heart and the hearts of his children slipping in hidden ways that people often don't notice when life is smooth. Whenever his children held feasts and music and laughter spilled through the tents, Job would rise early and offer sacrifices on their behalf. He did it not out of empty ritual, but out of love mixed with reverence. He would say to himself, as if speaking quietly into his own soul, "Perhaps my children have sinned in their hearts." Scripture describes him in one short line.
That man was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil.
Job 1:1. And his life was about to be thrust into a place where everything normal would be yanked from his hands like a cloth ripped away. The strangest thing was not the loss itself, but the way the loss arrived, blow after blow, steady and relentless, leaving no time to breathe, like someone pulling the rug from beneath him without letting him see the hand doing it. The first report came like an arrow. A herdsman ran back, face drained of color.
"Raiders fell upon us. They killed the servants. They took everything."
Job stood still, eyes unblinking. Before he could even inhale, the second report crashed in.
"Fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants."
Job swallowed hard. Job hadn't even managed to form a question when a third man rushed in, voice higher with panic.
"The Chaldeans from raiding parties and carried off the camels."
Then the fourth came. This one did not run fast. This one walked very slowly, as if carrying something unbearably heavy. When he finally lifted his eyes, he whispered,
"Your children were in the house of the eldest, and a great wind came and the house fell."
Job stood frozen for a long time. His gaze was empty, fixed on the space where his children's laughter used to live. And in that moment, the richest man became the poorest. Not because he lost possessions, but because he lost what cannot be purchased again. Job rose. He did not scream or wail. He did not kneel like a defeated man, but like a man clinging to the only solid ground left. There is one who has seen from the beginning. And from his mouth fell a sentence like a stone dropped into a well, echoing through history.
"Naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord."
Job 121. Not because he didn't hurt, but because even in pain, he chose not to let go of the one he trusted. But in truth, that was only the beginning of the storm. Sometime later, sickness covered Job like a robe of humiliation. Painful sores from head to foot, burning and itching, stabbing pain nights so long that each hour felt like a year. He sat in ashes, scraping his skin with a broken piece of pottery, no longer resembling the strong man he had been yesterday. And then the closest voice in his life, his wife, was no longer a shoulder to lean on, but the cry of despair turned into words.
Dost thou still retain thine integrity? Curse God and die.
Job turned to her. His voice was not loud, but it was hard as bone.
"What? Shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil?"
Job 2:10. Then 3 friends arrived, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. They saw Job from afar and did not recognize him because suffering had disfigured him. They sat down with him 7 days and 7 nights without speaking a word. That was the best part of them silence that honored pain. But human beings cannot bear silence for long, and when they began to speak, their words were like salt ground into an open wound. Eliphaz spoke softly, but with conclusions.
Surely you have done something wrong. God does not strike without cause.
Bildad nodded.
If your children died, then they must have sinned.
Zophar was harsher.
You deserve even worse.
Each sentence was like a hammer driving deeper. Not only had Job lost everything, now people wanted to steal from him, even the right to grieve. Job erupted, not to defeat them, but to protect the truth.
You speak as if you know every secret of heaven. But I cannot see sin in me that matches this.
At times, Job spoke words that sounded almost irreverent. He asked why. He wished he had never been born. Sometimes, he challenged God himself, not because he hated him, but because he could not endure the way silence draped itself over his suffering. Yet even in those shattered laments, Job did not turn his back. He did not reduce God to a concept. He turned God into a conversation. He kept facing heaven even with ash on his face. One night when everyone was exhausted and asleep, Job was alone. He lifted his eyes and spoke quietly, as if speaking into empty space.
If you are here, why are you silent?
And the answer did not come immediately. It came after a long stretch, so long that Job began to think silence would win. Not an explanation of why you suffer, not a moral lecture. God answered with presence, as if he himself stepped near the ash heap. Wind rose, dust swirled. A voice sounded from within the whirlwind, not soft like a lullaby, but vast like the sea.
Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Job 38:4.
God spoke of the sea and the sky, of rain and lightning, of stars that no human can hold. He widened Job's vision until Job could finally breathe again, not because the pain was smaller, but because Job realized this universe is not abandoned. It has a keeper. Job had no argument, no defense, no answer, only a trembling awe, as if the why in his chest stepped back, making room for something deeper. He is here. And Job said, voice as small as drifting ash,
I have heard of thee by the hearing of the ear, but now mine eye seeth thee.
Job 42:5.
Then God did something no one expected. He did not tell Job to focus only on himself. He told Job to pray for the friends who had wounded him. Job, the one in pain, opened his mouth to intercede. He did it not because he forgot, but because he had just seen a God larger than bitterness. And Scripture records,
And the Lord turned the captivity of Job when he prayed for his friends.
Job 42:10. In the end, Job's life was restored, not by returning everything exactly as it was. Some things do not return. Those 10 voices of laughter did not come back, but Job was given life to keep walking, not with a heart that had never broken, but with a heart that had broken and still learned to trust. And when Job grew old, his hair white like morning mist over a field, perhaps he still remembered the nights on the ash heap, but he also remembered something else the day God drew near.
If this story touched you, remember to like, share, and subscribe to tell more stories.
The story of Job reminds us of a painfully real truth. Not all suffering is punishment, and not every question receives a clear explanation. Faith is not always understanding why it is still turning toward God, even when your heart is in pieces. Job dared to speak honestly. His pain, his anger, his confusion, and that honesty kept him from losing his faith. What healed Job in the end was not an answer, but the presence of God. He was there. So if you are walking through a dark season, you may not have an explanation yet, but you still have an anchor. The one greater than every storm is very near, listening to both your prayers and your tears.